Chapter 4, Job Order Costing. And in this one, we get introduced to predetermined overhead rate. And I will often abbreviate this as POH, just so you're aware. In this one, and I'm starting off with problem number 417 to introduce you to some of the topics and some of the terminology. This company uses a job order costing system. And in a job order costing system, just think of it this way. So you have job ABC. And on this card, piece of paper, whatever you want to call it, you keep up with your direct materials, your direct labor, and your manufacturing overhead. And what you're doing is trying to accumulate all of the costs for this job in one place so that you can see your profit, set your selling price, analyze, predict, budget, etc. So this company tells us that the transactions took place. They requisitioned raw materials to be used in production, $40,000, 80% was direct and 20% was indirect. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this because I don't want to confuse So $80,000 of raw materials requisitioned, and what that means is they pulled them out of raw material inventory. 80% was direct materials, 20% was indirect materials. So imagine you have a storage building with lumber in it, and you requisition out the lumber to begin building tables, whatever it is you're producing. They tell us factory utility costs incurred were $14,600. Depreciation recorded on plant equipment was $28,000. I'm going to go ahead and put these numbers down because we're going to use them in our problem. So this is our factory overhead, utility, and depreciation on the plant equipment. Now remember, when we're talking about product cost and period cost, that plant and equipment, the $28,000, they tell us that 3/4 of the depreciation relates to factory and the remainder is selling and administrative. And so 75% of that is product cost and 25% of that is period cost. That goes back to what we learned in Chapter 2. They give us cost of salary and wages, and we've got direct labor, we've got indirect labor, we've got sales commissions, and we've got administrative salaries. And so it's really important that you keep these straight because you have to know what's product cost, you have to know what is a period cost, you have to know what is manufacturing overhead and what is not manufacturing overhead. So just as a reminder, struggling with my typing today. This is a product cost, direct. This is a product cost, and that is manufacturing overhead because it's indirect. This is a period cost, and this is a period cost. So remember that as you work through these problems. It tells us the insurance costs were $3,000, and that 80% of that was factory, and 20% of that was selling and administrative. I am really struggling on my typing today, trying to come back to work after spring break. Okay, then it tells us that we had miscellaneous selling and administrative expenses of $18,000. Incurred means we actually spent that money. Okay, finally, it tells us manufacturing overhead was applied to production. The company applies overhead on the basis of 150% of direct labor cost. So we'll put that information over here. And this is how we apply predetermined overhead. We'll talk more about that as we go through these problems. And I know I should probably just let typos go, but I can't do it. It's hard to talk, type, and think. Believe it or not, it's very difficult. Anyway, we'll get through this. Goods that cost $130,000 to manufacture according to their job cost sheets were transferred to finished goods, so those were completed. Goods that had a cost of $120,000 to manufacture according to their job cost were sold. So there's your sales price, $200,000. They ask us first to determine the underapplied or overapplied overhead for the year. So to do that, we have to figure out what is our applied overhead. And so it tells us that we're applying overhead at 150% of direct labor cost. And we know our direct labor cost is $40,000. And so our overhead applied would simply be our percentage, our rate, times our driver, which is direct labor cost, which was given to us. So we applied $60,000. Put that over here instead of here. Okay, so what that means is every time we spend $1 on direct labor cost, we added $1.50 of overhead to that job cost card. Okay, that's what that means. Then we look at that compared to our actual, and remember, this is an estimate. This is an estimate. This number, this predetermined overhead rate, is based on estimates. So you're never going to be right on, but you're going to be really close. Otherwise, you need to adjust your estimates. And so if we look at our actual overhead, our overhead incurred, we're going to have to pull out some of these numbers. And so we've got indirect materials, 20% of, is that right, 80,000? Let me make sure I've got the right numbers here. I'm going to go back and 40,000. I didn't think that matched the number I had used earlier. Okay. Just so you know, I always work these out before I make the video. So 20% of the materials we requisitioned were indirect. That's part of factory overhead. The utility is part of factory overhead. 75% of my depreciation is factory overhead. My indirect labor is factory overhead. And 80% of my insurance is factory overhead. So let's make sure, I think that's everything. So I can sum those numbers up, and I get 64,000 was my actual overhead. So what that means is I underapplied $4,000 of overhead. Now think about what that means in reality, big picture. So as the year went by, I was applying overhead, and I applied 60,000, but I actually spent 64. So the cost of my products aren't high enough. They have not absorbed all of my overhead. So that 4,000 of underapplied reflects my actual overhead. So what I have to do is take that underapplied, and I have to add it to my cost of goods sold so that my income statement reflects my actual overhead. Now, this will start hopefully coming to you as we go through these problems. Okay, so then it asked me, I'm still in this 417, it asked me to prepare an income statement for the year. And so to do that, I would start with my sales. And I'm not putting this in good form because I have a time limit on my video, so I can't put it in great form for you. We have cost of goods sold, we have gross margin, we have selling and administrative, and we have net operating income. And by time limit, I mean if I make this very long, you're not going to watch it. So bear with me as we work through these problems. I know they're kind of long. And so our sales for the year was given to us. It tells us in letter I that goods had a cost of $120 to manufacture according to their job cost sheets were sold for $200,000. So we know that our sales are $200,000. Now, if the job cost sheet, remember I told you the job cost sheet has direct materials, direct labor, and applied overhead. So if our job cost sheet has $120,000 on it, we underapplied our actual overhead. So we've got to add that $4,000 in there to make sure that we account for all of our actual overhead because our job cost sheet has the applied overhead. Then to get our gross margin, we have our sales minus our cost of goods sold, which gives us $76,000. And then our selling and administrative was given to us over here. We've got $10,400. We've got $18,000. And then we have 20% of the $3,000. I think that's right. So, am I missing anything? Oh, I also have my 25% of my depreciation. And I feel like I'm missing something else. my administrative salaries. There we go. Okay, so I think that's everything. So my net operating income would be my gross margin minus my selling and administrative expenses, or $15,000. Now, again, guys, I know I'm going really fast in these videos, but it's a video, so you can back up, watch it again, pause, take notes, move at your own pace, but I just want to make the best use of our time and get through these in a complete problem while I talk to you a little bit about what's going on. So I'll move on to the next problem now.